Hi, my name's Ian, and I'm here in this first ever episode of Creative Coach to help give you a space to think, a space to be inspired, a space to consider your learning, your practice, or just your life. Okay. Today's conversation is with a wonderful person, Kay Sidebottom, and Kay's going to introduce herself a little bit in a moment. Kay and I are talking together about the work of Gilles Deleuze, who is a very influential French philosopher of the late 20th century. We're not here to give you a lecture on him or provide a historical summary of his work, but we think Deleuze's work is interesting and is useful for us in reflection because he is quite provocative. There's bound to be things we don't understand about his work. There's bound to be things that we disagree with, or we find offensive about his work. But his emphasis on change, on becoming, on difference is really, really quite interesting, whatever we do with it. Quite hard to put labels on Gilles Deleuze. Some people would say, well, post-structural, postmodern, maybe he is those things, but actually that's not the totality of his work. His work's been extremely influential across a number of different disciplines, whether that's architecture, biology, law, the social sciences. So we think just talking about the general themes of his work and maybe to one or two specific ideas, and you can follow them up or not as you wish, will help you to reflect.
Yeah, so we always go straight for the jobs, don't we? So I'm a lecturer in education and childhood at Leeds Beckett University, which is a quite small university in the north of England. And I've not been there terribly long. My background is mainly sort of further education, community education, voluntary sector, that kind of stuff. And yes, and I suppose what that really speaks of to me is a values-based career that I've had, if that makes sense. So I've tried to let my values lead me through the different jobs that I've had. So public sector background, which has been really important to me. And I think what I'm liking about Leeds Beckett, there's a very strong emphasis around sort of social justice. So I would say that's something else that's maybe pivotal in my career and really important to me. Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, I've always worked with students who aren't kind of Russell group, not kind of classically educated, working class people like myself. And I think the most important thing I've always thought is, it's not just about me understanding it, it's about them understanding it as well. So, and not to be patronising and say I'm translating the ideas or anything like that. But it's more about saying, let's have a look at this together and let's make sense of it together. And there's no reason why anyone, I really believe this, no reason why anyone couldn't work with those ideas. But I think sometimes people try and gatekeep, particularly around philosophy. So I have a big passion that, we're all thinkers and we can all create new knowledge. And that sort of levels of education, actually. There isn't always a very kind of popular thing to say, I think, these days, particularly with the emphasis on transmitting knowledge and, the best that's been thought and said and all of that kind of thing. This idea that actually there might be new ways to think or new ideas to be had. And actually, when you look at kind of what's happening in the world and what's happening with the planet, surely the new knowledge has got to be sort of where it's at. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I think to sort of bring in a bit of theory, I suppose, connected to this, I think one of the things that is really important to me, and it's important in my teaching as well, it's kind of not what the theory says, but how you put it to work. And that's probably what's drawn me to some of the theories we're going to talk about today, because they're very much about action and praxis and it's the ideas are great, but what does it actually mean to people? How can you see this working for you? And how can kind of creative methods help us actualize that, I suppose? Of this stuff. I've kind of come to it very late on, I think, and there's always a fear that you're somehow doing it wrong. There's always people that say, oh no, you don't get it at all because you're applying it in the wrong way, or that wasn't what they were trying to say. And that really frustrates me, because I think we have to resist that idea that you can do something wrong, because I think Deleuze and Guattari said themselves, it's about what you do with it. It's about how you put it to work. So that's really important to me. And I kind of use that idea to try and get past the sort of imposter syndrome of reading the stuff and thinking, I have no idea what they're talking about, really, really difficult stuff to kind of get your head around. And that's why it's been really useful to connect with other people who are also doing the work, so you can sort of talk about it, make sense of it together, play around with it, think about new things that might spin out of it. And that's been important. I couldn't have done it on my own. It's had to be like a group effort. And that thing about we're always postponing what's happening in the here and now, and that really interests me. And I think the Deleuze stuff kicks back against that, because that idea of imminence, or we can only work with kind of what we're working with in the moment, and we're maybe always becoming something else. And that's been really powerful for me. And it also quite liberating, because I think it frees you, because you think actually that there's things that are happening now, and there's things that we're doing now that actually we need to think more about those. So thing about liberating, I really believe that, because I think often we're waiting for things to happen to us, aren't we? So we're saying, right, okay, I want to organise some CPD or something, and I need to wait for the funding, or I need to wait for my manager to give me the time off. So there's something about saying, actually, I'm not going to buy into that. I'm not going to wait for those things. I'm just going to make it happen. And I like the analogy of kind of kite surfing. I think it is, when you're sort of going with the wind a little bit, and you're allowing yourself to kind of drift along, and kind of making the most of things like coincidences or chance conversations. And rather than just sort of saying, oh, that's interesting, I'll let it slide, there's something about jumping onto those. That's it. I mean, he talks, I've never quite get my head around it, but I suppose it's that idea of, often we think about desire as something that we lack, don't we? So it's desire not of lack, but desire as kind of production. So actually, if we see it in that way, and for me, it's all about connections, and it's all about, people and community and all of those sorts of stuff. And I think if we're not careful, we get into those very fixed ideas of what communities are and what they can be. But once we start to think, no, actually, this could look very different, it could feel very different. Like when you go to networking events, and there's always an ulterior motive because it might further your career or whatever. And it's so totally different from that, because it's taken that idea of sort of strategy totally out the mix, and it's saying, it's really not about that at all. And that's really countercultural, actually. It's really quite revolutionary to think like that. And I'm not saying it isn't without its issues. I think in the idea of the rhizome, when they talk about rhizomatic connections, there can also be real power things. There can be quite incestuous things, or, cliques, all of that stuff that can still happen. So it's not saying it's ultimately totally positive. But I think it's being aware of that, but kind of thinking, well, I'm gonna do that anyway and see how it goes. absolutely. And I'm a big fan of Rosie Braidotti's work, and particularly around this idea of being post-human, and this idea that we have an idealized viewpoint of what man is based on those sort of Enlightenment ideals, and everything that's kind of there are many good things about humanism around equalities and things like that, but also this way that we elevate one form of human above other forms of human, and how there are assumptions, I think, built into our systems about the way things work and the way things have to work, because they've either always been done like that, or, certain people in positions of control like to keep that establishment, So I think things like the way we debate things, or the way we run our politics, or just the way Parliament's set up, or, the way we run our meetings at work, if you start to really question and unpick what's going on there, even the way that we use language in arguments, and, so things like thinking about feminist approaches like ethics of care, and how that really pushes back against that. So it's about, for me, questioning some of those assumptions around our practices, and that can be quite freeing in that you can sometimes see things for what they are, but I think it can also be quite frustrating, because sometimes people don't always want you to be the one questioning why do we have to do it like this. I love that connection as well. My dad was a map maker, used to work for the Ordnance Survey. So I was brought up reading maps, and I have a real love of maps. And I never use sat-nav because I always wanted to look at the map and know where I am sort of positioned. And I suppose how I've brought that into my practice. So Rosie Braidotti talks about the idea of cartography, and how we should be kind of mapping the genealogies of subjects, but also positioning ourselves kind of within those maps. And that's something that I've taken very much into my teaching, particularly when I was sort of training teachers. That thing about let's, have a look and map this stuff out. I think that's a really, really helpful thing to do. So, diagrams and the idea of connections. I think there's something about sort of, I suppose you might call it divergent thinking, that I think our schooling system really knocks out of kids, because kids have an amazing ability to do this, particularly kids we might consider neuroatypical or whatever. I think absolutely that gets kind of scrubbed out, because we have to work in silos in terms of subjects and all of that. So another thing, I suppose, in terms of practice is thinking across discipline borders and interdisciplinary work. I love all of that stuff. And art, I think, is the place often where we can do that, isn't it? And that's why I kind of, without being an artist, I think that's why I always try and bring it in, because it opens up new possibilities and new connections and just new ways of looking at the world. And as I keep saying, that's really what we need to be doing at this present moment in time. So.